The sun beat down on the cracked earth like an angry fist, and Thomas wiped sweat from his brow as he surveyed his small water stall, a weathered wooden structure, held together with rusted metal bands and pure stubbornness. Behind him, 3 large glass containers held the most precious resource on earth, clean water. Real water. Not the brackish, contaminated liquid that seeped from underground reservoirs. Poisoned by decades of industrial collapse. He'd been running the stall for 3 years. Ever since the Great Drought had swallowed the continent. Most people had died or migrated north, chasing rumors of functioning water systems that probably didn't exist. Thomas had stayed, using his grandfather's old purification system, a combination of ancient technology and sheer determination to create the only potable water within 100 miles. A woman approached in the distance, her silhouette wavering in the heat haze. Thomas straightened, already calculating the price. Water was currency now. A liter for 3 cans of preserved food. 2 liters for a full day's worth of supplies. He'd learned to be clinical about it, though guilt gnawed at his chest whenever someone couldn't afford his asking price. But as the figure drew closer, Thomas felt his breath catch. She was like nothing he'd ever seen. Her skin seemed to emit a subtle luminescence, a soft amber glow that made the air around her shimmer. Her eyes were too large, too knowing, and her movements too fluid, as if she were dancing rather than walking. Behind her, another figure materialized from the heat, equally ethereal and strange. Thomas gripped the edge of his counter. He wasn't religious, but for a moment he felt like he was experiencing something sacred or insane. The rational part of his mind screamed that the heat was playing tricks on him, that dehydration had finally caught up with his brain. He hadn't drunk deeply from his own supply in weeks, rationing everything for customers. The first woman smiled an expression that seemed to require effort, as if she were learning to use the muscles correctly. "Water," she said, her voice like wind chimes made of crystal. "We require water." Thomas's mouth went dry. Yes. I have water. How much do you need?" The second woman stepped forward, and he noticed her hand was trembling slightly. There was something desperate in her luminous eyes, something that transcended the alien nature of her appearance. She looked at him with an intensity that made him feel truly seen for the first time in years. "Everything," the first woman said quietly. "We need everything you have." Thomas should have asked questions. Why were 2 beings who clearly weren't from Earth desperately seeking water? Where had they come from? How had they survived the irradiated atmosphere that killed most unaccustomed organisms? But when the second woman reached out and touched his arm, her skin cool and silken, all rational inquiry evaporated from his mind. "Our ship," she said, her voice softer than her companion's, almost hesitant. "The engines require precise hydration. We have been traveling for a long time." The first woman was already removing items from a satchel that seemed to defy the laws of physics, impossible to access yet endlessly deep. She placed an object on Thomas's counter, a device that glowed with soft blue light, intricate circuits visible beneath translucent panels. Just looking at it made Thomas's eyes water. "This," the first woman said, "powers a year of energy. It is worth more than you could imagine in your economy." The second woman was trembling more noticeably now. She set down a small crystalline structure, no larger than a fist, that seemed to contain swirling galaxies of light within its facets. "Medicine," she whispered. "The medicine of our people. It can cure what your world considers incurable." Thomas felt their desperation like a physical force, and he understood something fundamental in that moment. They weren't powerful beings visiting a lesser world. They were refugees, stranded, dying of thirst just like anyone else. "How much water?" he asked, his voice barely steady. "All of it," the second woman said. And there was such vulnerability in her request that Thomas felt something crack open in his chest. "Please, all of it." He looked at the 3 containers behind him, each one representing months of careful purification, the product of his isolation and sacrifice. He looked at these strange, glowing women who had descended from the sky like emissaries of another age. And he realized he'd been waiting for a reason to stop. "It's yours," he said. The relief that flooded the second woman's face was unmistakably human in its emotion, transcending any alien differences. She reached out and squeezed his hand, her touch electric and warm. "Thank you," she breathed. "You don't understand what this means." "I think I do," Thomas said softly, turning to begin transferring the water container's dot as he worked. The second woman moved beside him, helping despite having no real strength. Her shoulder brushed his repeatedly, and each contact sent small pulses of unexpected warmth through his body. When he caught her watching him with those enormous, impossible eyes, he felt something he thought the drought had killed in him: connection. The first woman worked methodically, filling sealed vessels with meticulous care. But Thomas noticed her watching her companion with something like concern. "Vex," she said gently, "we must be swift." The second woman, Vex, pulled her eyes away from Thomas reluctantly. "Yes, of course, Nix." It took them merely an hour to transfer all the water. Thomas had no idea how much its true value should be compared to the alien artifacts covering his counter. But when Vex looked at him with gratitude so profound it made her glow brighter. He knew he'd made the only trade that mattered as the final container was secured. Vex placed something in his hands, a small data chip, warm and slightly pulsing with light. "Find somewhere to go," she said. "Look for water in the north. And know that somewhere among the stars, someone will remember your kindness." Thomas stood alone at his stall as darkness fell. The containers were gone. The water was gone. And with them had vanished the reason he'd constructed this life in the desert. He should have felt victimized, cheated. His entire enterprise had been built on this water supply. Instead, he felt oddly liberated, as if a weight he'd carried for 3 years had lifted. He looked at the alien artifacts scattered across his counter-technology that would make him wealthier than entire nations. Medicine that could heal the incurable power sources that seemed to defy entropy. None of it felt real. None of it compared to the memory of Vex's cool fingers against his hand. Thomas picked up the data chip she'd given him and studied it in the starlight. He didn't have equipment to read it, but he felt certain it contained something important. Maybe directions. Maybe a message. Maybe nothing but the ghost of her intention. The night was silent except for the wind rattling across the dead earth. Thomas found himself building a fire from salvaged wood, then just sitting, watching it burn. He'd grown accustomed to isolation, but this felt different. He'd tasted connection brief, impossible, and alien, and now the solitude pressed against him like a physical thing. He wondered where they'd gone, whether their ship still functioned, whether they'd survived their journey, whether Vex had thought of him after leaving by dawn. Thomas had made his decision. He began dismantling the stall, carefully packing the alien artifacts and his essential supplies. The water purification equipment he left behind, it seemed wrong to abandon it without knowing if someone else might need it. Though he suspected no one would come, he walked north, following the vague memory of Vex's words. The first weeks were brutal. His feet blistered and bled. His throat burned. But the alien medicine worked in ways he didn't understand. Wounds closed impossibly fast. Infection never took hold. And his body seemed to develop a resistance to the contaminated water he was forced to drink. The power device sustained him too, activating a personal shield against the worst radiation as he moved through the dead zones. Thomas realized these objects weren't just valuable, they were survival tools. And Vex had given them to him knowing exactly what he would need as he traveled. He sometimes took out the data chip and held it, hoping that merely touching it might activate some revelation. But it remained dormant until one evening when he was standing beneath a particularly bright patch of stars, the ones that seemed to shimmer with that same amber glow. The chip suddenly warmed in his palm, projecting a holographic message that made his breath stop. It was Vex's voice, but also her image rendered in three-dimensional light. "Thomas," she said softly, "I'm writing this for you to find when you're truly alone, when you're ready to understand. The water we took wasn't our greatest need. The connection was. On our world, we had forgotten how to sacrifice for each other. We had forgotten how it felt to trust a stranger, to give without calculating profit." His heart was racing. "I didn't think it was possible," she continued, and the holographic Vex's expression was one of wonder. "I didn't know another species could carry that capacity for simple kindness. I will think of you across every light year we travel. And Thomas? We will return. When the world heals, when water flows again, we will return to find you." The message dissolved. Thomas stood in the starlight, tears streaming down his face, understanding finally why he'd given away everything. 3 months of walking transformed Thomas. The dead zones gave way to semi-arid plains, then to actual vegetation, sparse shrub grass and hardy trees that seemed to exist in a state of permanent drought resistance. The power device and alien medicine kept him alive, but it was hope that kept him moving. He found a small settlement near what had once been a major city, perhaps 500 people living in the skeleton of civilization, with a functioning well that produced brackish but tolerable water. They welcomed him as a trader, curious about his artifacts, desperate for the advanced technology. Thomas negotiated carefully. He traded the power device for shelter and supplies, but kept the medicine and the data chip. He told no one about the aliens. It would have sounded insane, and besides, it was his. Their story, his memory, his inexplicable connection to Vex. But he couldn't stop searching for her. At the settlement, he met Arden, a woman who worked in the settlement's communication center, place where they'd managed to maintain some of the old radio equipment. She was practical, strong, competent, and entirely human. She offered him companionship, and for a while, Thomas tried to reciprocate. But he couldn't. Every time Arden touched him with genuine affection, he thought of Vex's electric coolness, her otherworldly eyes, the way she'd looked at him with such desperate hope. Arden eventually grew frustrated with his distraction and drifted away to someone more present. Thomas didn't blame her. He was haunted in the way only love or the memory of its promise could haunt a person. He spent his evenings in the communication center, learning to operate the equipment, trying to find some way to send a message into the stars. Arden's successor, a patient man named Colt, taught him the fundamentals of radio transmission, though they both understood that reaching beyond Earth's orbit was impossible with their resources. "Who are you trying to reach?" Colt asked one day, noting Thomas's obsessive focus. Thomas almost told him the truth, but instead he said, "Someone I made a promise to." Colt nodded without judgment. People do strange things for promises. In his private quarters, Thomas would take out the data chip and replay Vex's message, memorizing every inflection of her voice, every word. He began writing responses in a journal, letters that would never be sent, conversations with a ghost made of starlight and memory. Then, one evening, when he was reviewing old astronomical data in the settlement's database, he found something impossible. A record of an anomalous ship sighting, logged nearly 2 years ago in the northern hemisphere. The description matched nothing in any database of Earth origin. Thomas packed his most essential belongings that night. Colt didn't try to stop him, just offered supplies and directions to other settlements further north. "Seems like you found your answer," the old man said. I'm not sure, Thomas admitted. Doesn't matter, Colt said. You've got to look for it anyway. That's what promises are for. The search took another year. Thomas crossed into regions that had barely recovered, where the air still shimmered with residual radiation and the water systems remained poisoned. He used the alien medicine to survive what should have killed him. He rationed his resources with the precision of someone who had already learned how to live with almost nothing. The sighting had been recorded in the far north, near the Arctic regions where the climate had shifted unpredictably. Thomas pushed deeper into territories few humans ventured into anymore, following the logic of where a disabled ship might land for repair. It was Vex who found him. He didn't recognize her at first. She approached his small camp on a spring afternoon when he'd stopped to filter water from a partially thawed lake. But when she stepped into the light, her amber glow unmistakable, his entire body went rigid. "Thomas," she said, and her voice was exactly as he remembered it, exactly as the data chip had preserved it. "You came north." She looked different, frailer, somehow, despite the ethereal glow. There were marks on her skin like scars, luminescent lines that tracked across her arms and neck. "Your ship?" he said hoarsely, standing on unsteady legs. "You crashed." "We landed," she corrected, "and we have been healing. The water you gave us was enough, but barely. I was not certain you would come." She moved closer, and he saw that her movements were slower now, more careful. "I feared I had asked too much." Thomas reached out without thinking, touching the luminescent scar running down her arm. "What happened?" "The journey," Vex said quietly. "Space between stars is not kind to our bodies. Nyx recovered fully, but she paused, as if searching for words. "I was damaged in ways the medicine could not completely heal. Nyx has gone to the settlement to negotiate for more water, more supplies. She did not want me to come alone, but I needed to know if you—" Thomas pulled her close, surprising both of them. Vex made a small sound of distress that transformed into something like relief as she let herself collapse against him. She was warmer now than in their first meeting, as if proximity to him generated heat. "I kept your message," he said into her hair. "I read it 1,000 times. Did you?" Vex pulled back slightly, searching his face with those impossible eyes. "We have been analyzing the data from your world, Thomas. We have begun to understand something. Consciousness is not bound by species. Connection is not limited by biology. What we felt with you, what I felt, it is rare even among our people. Perhaps rarer still across species. What are you saying?" Thomas asked, though his heart was already answering. "I am saying that I would like to stay," Vex said. "To learn your world. To learn you. To discover if what began with water and kindness can become something more." Thomas kissed her then, slowly, carefully, mindful of her scars and the fragile brightness of her. Her lips were strange too soft, responsive in ways that didn't quite match human anatomy, but the sensation of kissing her was the most real thing he'd ever experienced. When they broke apart, Vex was glowing brighter, a luminescence that suffused the darkness of the Arctic night. "This," she said wonderingly, "this is the data I could not have predicted. Is it good?" Thomas asked. "It is," Vex confirmed, "very good." They spent the night talking, sharing stories of their worlds, of loneliness transformed through a single act of grace. Thomas told her about his time alone, how he'd come to understand that connection was itself a form of water essential, life-giving, impossible to survive without for long. Vex told him about her world, a place of advanced technology but eroding empathy, where kindness had become obsolete. "Your gift," she said, "gave us more than water. It gave us hope that beings could still feel genuine connection." When dawn came, they walked together to meet Nyx, who returned with supplies and a knowing expression that suggested she'd suspected this reunion all along. The three of them stood at the edge of the recovering world, watching the sun rise over a landscape that was slowly learning to heal. "What will you do now?" Nyx asked Thomas. He looked at Vex, seeing himself reflected in her luminous eyes, not the last man with clean water, but someone who had learned that some treasures transcend material value. "Stay," he said simply. "Help you heal. And maybe," he smiled at Vex, "learn what it means to build something new." As they walked back toward the settlement, toward the future waiting beyond the horizon, Thomas felt the weight of the old world finally release its grip. The drought wasn't just water, it had been a drought of the spirit, of connection, of believing in the possibility of bridging impossible distances. Vex took his hand as they walked, her touch electric and warm, and Thomas understood that some deals were never truly concluded. They were merely the beginning of something that neither species could have predicted, written in the language that predated all worlds, the pure, undeniable power of two beings choosing to trust each other. End of story.